Can we shift tack quickly? Because there's another side of it that I'm really interested in that you had on your plate when you were at Arsenal, and that's the succession planning management piece around Arsene Wenger and the most iconic person in the club almost for that time, not necessarily being on the pitch, but in the dugout. As a leader, as the man in charge of those decisions, how do you come to that decision when it comes to looking at the future?
Yeah. So, I mean, a football club is unusual, right, in the sense that the chief executive is not necessarily the most important person at the club. The way that we are structured, you have a board, of course, that you're reporting to, the owner, and then you will have very, very important figures in our club who are on the sporting side. So Arsene, of course, is a giant of the club. And I've always said, the most difficult decision at Arsenal would be not how you replace Arsene, because that would be impossible, but how do you manage the club through a transition whenever that would happen. And it is tremendously difficult because I think when somebody's been at a football club for that long, every piece of the club becomes, imbued with that person's values and ethos, and we at Arsenal benefited from that immensely because Arsene really created the modern Arsenal. But there comes a time, whenever that is, that you've got to then look at the future, and that involves having a new person, and actually in a modern football club, new people. You hope without damaging the best of those values. But they're going to have their own ideas and, give new impetus and new thoughts to how to push the club forward. It's challenging because you can't really build the bicycle while you're cycling it. And, of course, you're going to be cycling it in football every day as hard as you can, pedaling as hard as you can, right up until whenever the finish line is. And the date of when that is uncertain as well. So I think there's some particular challenges in a football context. I think one of the things that I would say business in general suffers from, but I think maybe football in particular, is because you have so many people who are in jeopardy of losing their job, because it is so male-dominated and has a very male-dominated ethos. I think you have a leadership model that is very much based on the great leader who knows everything. Everything must go to the great leader. Nothing must be done without the great leader. You have people underneath who are petrified that they might lose their jobs, so become quite defensive about their area. Proximity to the leader is gives them security, and conversely, if they feel like they're disconnected from the leader, they don't have such security, and they're very protective of their area because they don't want somebody asking questions about what's happening in their area of expertise. I'm not talking about Arsenal now. I'm talking about in football in general and what I've seen. This type of management model is outdated and inefficient when the world is changing very, very quickly. We can think about different leadership models that exist where there is a lot more collaboration happening, both horizontally and vertically, that they are less hierarchical. So it's not that the chief executive or whoever the leader is knows everything at all. Quite the opposite. It's really cultural environment that you create where people feel safe and secure asking questions, asking for help. Men don't even like to ask for directions in the street, right? So in this generally very male environment, very insecure environment, I think there's a lot of behaviors that are not optimal ultimately for good, flexible, modern functioning organization. And I think that question, for example, of, can you help me? I don't know the answer in an organization is tremendously powerful, because when you do that, you've paid a compliment to the person you're asking, which says, I think you can help me. And that's, by the way, is a bond that then forms between us, because you don't forget how valued you felt. But then secondly, you actually help me and you bring a different perspective to the problem that I'm working on. And in a lot of football clubs, you won't get that question being asked enough, because people are frightened of, the questions that might be asked. They're frightened to admit that they don't know everything.
Is that not the role of the leader, though? And what I mean by that is, like, it's the CEO often who sets the culture. It's top down. So you can say in the board meeting, I don't know the answer here, or I actually made this mistake last week. How should we think? Like, is that not the leader to imbue that culture top down?
Yes, it is. So you've got to create an environment in which culturally that is happening. And that's one of the big challenges of leadership. And of course, again, in a football club, it's a little bit unusual, right? About who is the leader. You've got a chief executive, and then you've got the sporting side, which is driving so much of the culture in a football club.
And when the brand of the sporting side, in particular a Wenger, a Ferguson, a Mourinho, is so big, although hierarchically they may not be the boss, so to speak, technically, that's a big brand to deal with.
It is. And look, again, I really, I'm not saying this about Arsene Wenger. I want to be totally clear about that. Arsene is one of the most incredible leaders that I have known. And so, to me, he imbues those values. So this is really not about Arsene. I'm talking about football generally, what I see. So what I see is, a lot of this type of defensiveness in the industry. And I think, one of the things that we need to develop is a more progressive leadership style in football. And I think that would benefit the game. And I think one of the interesting things is, if you can do that, if you can create, and I see some football clubs doing this, creating some really interesting environments. If you can create the right cultural environment, then that will lead to success.